Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you some jelly printing, but I'm going to be doing some printing with leaves. It is fall time coming up. It's the perfect time to go out and start cutting out those bushes and plants and just grabbing some leaves and having some fun with your jelly plate. So the first thing you're going to need obviously is a jelly plate. I'm using the 8x10 one. There are so many different sizes of jelly plates. You can buy a bigger one and cut it down. There are a lot of different options. This is just the one I am using. I also have it on a piece of essentially plastic. It is the top of a bin. And that just allows me to be able to flip this over, move it around, and kind of see what I'm doing and where I'm putting it on a piece of paper if I want to double print or something along those lines. It also gives me a nice little handle. I will also be using a brayer. This is just a normal, regular, everyday brayer to brayer on my ink, do some pressing with it, those kinds of things. There are a lot of different ones on the market. I will leave a few linked over on my Amazon storefront page. And then I will also be using some scrap paper off to the side to just clean my brayer off as I'm working. So just have a piece of that ready to go. I'm using plain white paper today, but I have been known to use book pages and then use those in my journaling later on too. Just another idea. Now on my work surface, I have some brown paper. Jelly printing can get a little messy. I also get a lot of paint flicks just from brayering. So I like to put down just some scrap paper. This is just a big roll of craft paper that you would use for like packing. I will leave that linked over on my Amazon storefront as well. I just roll a couple sheets out, put this underneath what I'm working on, and it saves my worktop and a lot of cleaning. I'm also going to be using acrylic paint for my printing today. I'm going to be using a mix here. I have some of the cheaper acrylic paints, and these are kind of my favorite to use. I can get more colors of them, and I can get a lot for a little bit of money, and they print beautifully. I will also be using some heavy body acrylic paints. Now these are a little bit thicker. They do go a lot further whenever you're using them, so you don't need to use as much. You can get a number of colors in these as well. You can also mix colors, but these are more pricey than the other acrylic paints. They also have a different texture and a different dry down. The cheaper acrylic paints dry more matte. These have a little bit more shiny finish. And these are kind of a mix between the two, I would say. Not as heavy body as a heavy body, but not as runny as the cheaper acrylic paints. These are just a Michaels brand, Artist Loft. There's a lot of different colors in this pack. A good value if you're just starting out, and quite a few different colors. So a few different options. I'm just using acrylic paint across the board. I will also be printing onto different kinds of paper. I print onto regular white printer paper. This is 8.5 by 11. It's just your standard copier paper. I will leave it linked over on my Amazon storefront as well. And then also I will be printing on a number of other kinds of paper. These are old book pages. These are pages from old workbooks, things along those lines. You can use music pages. So many different options and just a lot of fun to play around with. So I will be using a lot of these different types of paper for my printing today. And these just give you a great base and a little bit more texture to start off with. So that's what I am using today for the basic supplies. Now for the leaves, I have a number of different leaves. I just went out to my yard and cut some hosta leaves, some hydrangea leaves. The hosta leaves are a couple different sizes of. I took some off the trees, off the ground. You can take them from your flowers, your bushes. You can cut branches. I just went out, grabbed some leaves that I like the shape of, and cut them off and brought them inside. I also took some evergreen shrub. These make a really great texture as well with jelly printing. So just have fun, look around, see what you have. One last thing that I will be using is this gel medium. This is great for picking up whole entire pieces where you've done a lot of layers, but you don't want to add any more color. So this is something I like to use a lot of when I'm jelly printing, and I just want to mention it because I will use it a few different times. And to get that on, I will have a palette knife also, but you can use an old credit card, anything along those lines. So I'm going to start off and just do a really simple print. I'm starting with some green acrylic paint, and I'm going to put a little bit onto the jelly plate. I like to put a couple little small blobs down. You can add more paint, you can take some off. You really can't go wrong and you can't mess it up. So just use your best judgment and start rolling. I like to go one way, then turn my brayer and go the next way. You also don't want to go back and forth, back and forth. Pick it up. So roll a couple times, pick it up, roll a couple times, pick it up. Don't roll back and forth. Just make sure that you're picking it up with each pass, so that way you are spreading the paint evenly. You can see I'm starting to get a nice little coat, a nice even coat, I should say. And where I started out with those two blobs and it looked like it would never be enough, it really does brayer out into a great thin overall coat. Now to clean this off, I just roll it on that scrap paper a few times until no more paint comes off, and then I flip it over to where those tongs are underneath so it's not going to glue down to my paper and pull up any of that paper, that scrap paper that it's resting on. Then I'm going to start placing down my leaves. I've got a few of these hydrangea leaves that I cut, not hydrangea, they're hosta leaves that I cut off from one of my plants. And I'm just placing these down right on top of the jelly plate and the wet paint. Now, if you have any larger, thick stems like this one, you can just use a pair of scissors and snip those off. These will get in the way and kind of warp your paper. So I like to just snip them off to make sure that I'm going to get some nice coverage. Now I've got those leaves down where I want, so I'm going to grab a piece of printer paper, put that right on top, and start pressing down with my hand. Now when you use your hands like this, you're going to be able to really feel through the paper where those leaves are, so you can give a good press around all those areas where you want to pick up the ink. So I'll just continue pressing around those, making sure I'm picking up all that ink, really pressing around the edges, and then I can kind of lift up the sides, see where I'm at with the ink lifting process, give it a few more presses if I think it needs it, with my fingers really focusing on those edges to get as close to those as possible and picking up all that extra paint. Now once I'm satisfied and I think I have all that ink picked up, I'll go ahead and remove that paper, and I have picked up all that extra ink from around the leaves, and I have just those negative spaces. I do have a few little spots just around the edges that didn't pull up all of the ink, and I do want to remove that, so I'll just use that same piece of paper. I'm not so worried about the print on this one, and it'll just add a little bit more texture. So I'll just go around those edges, make sure I press down really good, get all that extra paint off, and then I will start to remove these leaves, and that is going to leave behind the impression of those leaves. And because the leaves were on top of this paint has not set up and fully dried. It is a very thin coat, so it doesn't take long. But once I've removed those leaves, I'm going to give it a few seconds, wave it a little bit with my acrylic mat here, and just let that fully dry. Then on top of that, I am going to add a little bit of this creamy color of acrylic paint. Now this is one of the cheaper acrylic paints, and it is a little bit more liquidy, so I have added a little bit more, you can see, and I'm just going through the same process. I'm using my brayer back and forth, making sure I pick it up with each pass, and just starting from one edge, going to the next, making sure I make this into a nice, thin, even coat. And as I am kind of rolling this out, you can start to see those leaves peek through this. Because this is such a thin layer of paint, it will start to pull through and peek through. Now the paint is dry. It's not going to move as long as you don't press super hard. So keep a light hand, let the brayer do the work, let the time and the rolling do the work, and don't press too hard. Just keep it nice and light. once I have my coat nice and even, I'm going to place another piece of paper on top and start to rub with my hand. Now here's where you do want to put a little pressure down. You want to make sure that you're kind of penetrating those paints and making sure that you pick those up. I'm also going to rub this for a while, let that paint kind of dry onto the paper. You can use your brayer if your hand doesn't have enough strength to really give that a good press and let that paint almost dry onto the paper. You'll start to feel that it's not as cold. You can also check the edges. The edges are a really good indicator of where it's at in the process of drying. Once you feel like you have a really good press and you have a good dry on this, you can go ahead and remove that paper, peel it up. Now it is a little bit tricky to peel up. You don't want to pull too hard or fast and rip it. So be nice and gentle and take your time. And there you have this beautiful impression of the leaves in the green. And then you have that background with the cream. This is just a really, really beautiful print that you can pull with just a few paints and just a few leaves from your yard. It really is that simple. Here is a nice close-up of that image. I scanned this into my computer just because I don't feel like pictures are the best indicator. But there's a look at that one. All right, let's move on to another one. Now, you can leave what is left over on your jelly print. That's what I normally do. And just continue to pull, and it's going to add little bits here and there from the previous prints, and that's kind of the beauty of jelly printing. But for this, I went ahead and wiped off the excess because I do just want to show you some clean prints. But no, I normally do not do that. So I cleaned it off with a baby wipe and let it dry. And now I'm going to add a few different colors of acrylic paint onto my jelly plate. And this is going to just create a lot of different texture. When I don't know what to do or I don't know where to start on prints, this is a lot of times what I do. I just throw a couple of colors onto the plate, use my brayer to kind of roll them out with different rolling techniques, if you will. I don't know, just kind of a little bit here, a little bit there, and then mixing them all at the end. And that is where I start a lot of my prints with, kind of like I'm doing here. Just a little bit here, a little bit there. And that is going to kind of separate these colors, keep them separated, but also allow them to blend in different places. And then once I have a little bit here, a little bit there, I will start to roll like I normally do. And just use my brayer, making sure that I keep pulling it up after each pass. And this almost gives a watercolor look, if you will. Very blended, but a little splotchy at the same time. And any of that extra paint you can see, I'm just using my brayer and that scrap paper to roll it off over at the side, because with this technique, you do have a little bit more paint on there, and I don't want all that paint on there. So I'm just rolling it out, allowing them to mix, and then pulling it off to the side using my brayer. Now for this print, I am going to place down 2 leaves just horizontally, and I'm going to use an old book page to pull this up. So I'm first going to put the leaves down once I've brayered out my background, place that book page right on top, kind of lining it up as best as possible, and then again, just start pressing. Now I didn't line this up perfectly, and just so I don't get any paint on my hands, I'm going to kind of use an extra sheet of paper to get that little bit off on the side there. It's not a science here, it's just do the best you can when lining up. Sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. I just didn't want to get a ton of paint on my hands, so I went ahead and removed that from the side, and I'm just doing the same process, giving this a really good press. And then once I have it pressed, I'm going to start removing from one side, pull that leaf up, and then push that paper right back down on top of where it was. I'll do the same thing with the other leaf, pull up this side, remove that leaf ever so carefully, and then kind of press from the one side down to the bottom and press that right back on top of the print. And here's where you want to put some pressure down. I'm using my brayer to give myself a little bit extra pressure, a little bit extra force there to really pick up this print. And there, I'm going to start lifting it up once it's dry. You'll see it doesn't look like it transferred, but it did. It just has a little leftover behind. But now I have that background, but then I also have those ghost prints of the leaves. So you can see all the veins right in the center. And then I have that book page behind it as well, which is just an added layer. And this would make a beautiful start to a journal page. I absolutely love doing this. It is a simple and fast way to start making some of those journal pages. Now, another technique is actually transferring images with your Gelli plate. And when I do that, what I am left with are these book pages or magazine prints that are either navy or black. I have a ton of them just because I'm kind of trying different book pages, seeing if this will transfer, seeing if this will transfer. And a lot of times they do, which is great, but then I am left with literally just a black background with a little bit of the texture showing through. So this is a great way to use up some of those extra pages too. You could just throw them away. You could just use them as a base. That's great too. That's kind of what I'm doing here. I had a little bit of those leaves left over on the Gelli plate, and I didn't want them to go to waste and just wipe them off with a baby wipe. So what I'm doing is applying a little bit of that matte medium. You could use gloss. It's just going to be a different finish. I prefer matte. And I'm going to spread that out with my brayer, just like I did with the paint. You're going to treat it exactly like a paint. Make sure you have a nice thin coat on top and just apply that all the way across. And you might have seen before when I used my palette knife to put that on, you don't need a lot of this. A little bit of this goes a really long way. This is essentially a very strong glue. And you want to make sure that you get all of that extra off your brayer, first of all, to put that on the scrap paper so it doesn't glue down, because it certainly will. I've done it before. Then you want to take your pages. I'm using those leftover transfer sheets that I use for my Gelli printing, and I'm just placing those right down on top of the leaves. I'm kind of overlapping them. This is really just to pull up and use what I have. And then I'm using my brayer to really press those down. Now, the thing with the gel medium, you do want to give this time to dry. This is not a quick process with the gel medium. It does take a little bit of time to dry, but it is a great way to transfer things if you want to pull every single bit off the Gelli plate. And if you use a very thin coat, it does dry fairly quickly. You can always use a hair dryer on low with no heat, and then that will help it dry as well. But I just pulled that up once it was fully dry, and there I got just the little remnants of that leaf that was left over onto these book pages, and it turned out beautifully. I love doing this technique, especially again with those leftover transfer sheets that I don't really know what to do with. It's a great project to use those up. Now for this print, I'm going to start off with some black. And I don't want to fill up the whole Gelli plate with this one. I really just want a very, very thin kind of, what I'm doing here is making a card base essentially. I didn't want to leave out my card makers for this video. This is a great technique for journaling, but you can also make some beautiful cards with it as well. So what I'm doing is rolling out a nice little square here. You don't have to fill up the entire Gelli plate if you don't want to. You can just do little bits and pieces here and there as well. I did a small square of black. I'm putting in a small leaf inside, and then I'm going to grab a book page, and I'm just going to use the other side of this. And because I'm using black, what it's going to do is cover up the words that are already written on the page. It's going to blend right in with those. And it's going to leave just the opening of the leaf. So you're only going to be able to read the words where the leaf was, which is a beautiful technique. This would make a really great tag or a really great card background as well. Or again, a piece in your journal. Very, very beautiful. So I went ahead and put another piece of scrap paper over that just so I didn't smear the paint everywhere. Giving this a good press with my hand. Once I pull this up, I will have this space where the leaf was, and it just leaves that opening where you have just the words. I absolutely love this one. I can't wait to play around with this technique a little bit more for some of my card bases. But I wanted to pull up just a little bit of extra ink. Some of those thicker pieces will get a little bit of a stronger border around them. Just use an extra sheet of paper to pull that up. Then I will pull up the leaf, which will leave me with that impression of the leaf itself. I'm using a wipe to get all of those extra pieces from around the edges because I really want this to be nice and clean for my card. So I'll just use a baby wipe to clean up all the little excess from around the edge, and then I will allow that to dry, because if you don't, then it's going to transfer right onto whatever you're transferring the rest of the image onto. Now, in order for this to transfer over, but not add any color, I'm going to use the gel medium once again. For the background, I use my Gelli plate, and I use that same technique I used before. Put a little paint here, a little there, a little here, and a little there. Mixed it with my brayer on the Gelli plate, which creates a abstract, no background is going to be the same. And you can lay quite a few card bases on this large of a Gelli plate and get a lot of different backgrounds that way. Great place to start out with some of those card backgrounds. And then you can just add different sorts of images on top of them like I'm doing here. Now to pull this, like I said, I'm using the gel medium. Again, very thin layer. The great thing about the matte gel medium, it's not going to add any different finish. And all it's going to do is pull the image. It won't alter the colors that you have on the background in any way. So I'm going to go ahead and place that down, give it some good pressure, either with my hand or my brayer. Once it's dry, I can peel this up. And it does take a little bit of elbow grease, if you will, but there I have that beautiful leaf transferred image right on top of the card base where I did some of that Gelli printing to begin with. Beautiful, beautiful image. This is just a really great technique to make some very abstract looking cards. Here's a look at a few more card bases I made. The one I just did a white background with a leaf transfer on top of it. Again, gorgeous, very clean and simple. And then this one, I did the ghost printing along with the background all in one go. So you can do a number of different ways to create journal pages, create your card backgrounds. You really can use this technique for any sort of paper craft that you might like to do. All right, this next one is a fun one. I added some browns and reds and yellows and whites. I was going for a fall looking background. This is kind of one of those happy accidents, but I ended up with more of a pink background. I don't know. It turned out beautiful. Wasn't what I was going for, but I'm happy it happened this way. Again, I'm using those hosta leaves, just placing them around onto the Gelli plate, kind of filling in those spaces and just tucking them in. Then I'm using a book page just to peel up all of that extra paint that is around the leaves that are kind of protecting those areas. So again, using my hand to really go around those edges, make sure I get all that extra paint, and I did that onto a book page, and I ended up with this beautiful print. I mean, this is going to look great in a journal. It's going to look great as a card background or a tag. So I'm going to set that off to the side. I might do more printing on that. I might not. I haven't decided yet. But this one, I'm going to go ahead and remove those leaves now. And then I have these beautiful leaf images underneath. And before I go and I print this onto another piece of paper, what I'm going to do is actually add a little bit of gold gilding flakes, or these are actually kind of a mix. So what I'm doing again is grabbing that gel medium. Again, this is just one of those great tools to have on hand when you're Gelli printing. It's a nice clear medium where it's going to pull up everything on the mat, and in my case, keep these gilding flakes onto the mat itself. So I'm just using a pair of tweezers and being ever so careful not to sneeze or breathe near these gilding flakes, and placing some down onto the Gelli plate in different areas. Now you can see I have put a very thin layer of that matte medium. The great thing about this being on the Gelli plate, it does not dry quickly when there's nothing on top of it. So you do have some playtime with this. Especially if you're in a colder environment, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. Just make sure you don't have any fans on so it's not drying down as you're working. It should stay wet for a very long time. I'm just placing some of these down. You don't have to be too careful. And then I'm pouncing on top of them just to get them to stick into that glue and kind of hold their place on the mat. And there are a ton of different kinds of gilding flakes out there. I'm using a mix. I will leave what I use linked over on my Amazon storefront as always. However, any gilding flake will work with this. You can even use some foiling sheets. So like those gold foil sheets that you have, those kinds of things you can use in the same exact manner. Now, once I have them down where I want them, I'm going to use my finger to pounce them down and make sure they're nice and secure in that glue. And then I'm going to add just a dot of the matte medium on top of these gilding flakes. There's nothing on the back of them at this point, so I'm afraid that if I were to put these down onto another piece of paper, there's nothing holding them down. I'm using my brayer just to spread that out a little bit. This will move those gilding flakes around too as you're doing this and add a more organic look to them, which I really love as well. And it's going to pick some up and move them around. That's okay. I'm just rolling out this medium to make sure that these are going to stick whenever I put this, kind of stamp this down onto another sheet of paper. So what I am stamping this down onto is actually a piece that I have worked on before. So whenever I'm doing my jelly printing, if I'm like, okay, I feel like this one's at a good place now, but I don't know if I'm done, I let them dry and I stick them in a folder. And then I can go back and I can keep adding layers onto them as I want to. So for this, I grabbed one that had some blue, some black, some gold, and I'm just going to flip over my mat with my jelly plate on it and push this down right on top. This way I can see through that clear base that my jelly plate is sitting on, and I can almost use it like a stamp, which is great because I can see through and line it up. Then I can press it down, flip it back over, and use my hand in my brayer to really give this a good press, and then allow it to dry because, as always, we need that matte medium to dry down, if not totally, almost totally, to be able to pull up all of those layers that are on the jelly plate. Once I feel like it's at a good place, I'm going to go ahead and pull slowly and easily to remove this. And there is a look at that print. This one is one of my favorites. I love the added gold foil. It's got some gold paint in there as well on that background. And then just the texture of the leaves and the different prints that I've done on this piece. It really is one of my favorites and just so beautiful. And here's one final look at that finished piece. This is one of my favorites, and a reason I just keep working on pages until I'm completely happy with them. And then they can go in the finished pile. And of course, I didn't want any of this leftover gilding flakes and a little bit of the print to get left behind. So I rolled a little bit more gel medium on there, pressed this onto another piece that's wasn't finished and it's still not finished, but I wanted to add some of those gilding flakes to it. This has nothing to do with the printing with leaves, but just something I like to keep doing, keep printing until I'm happy with the piece, like I said, and just use up all those leftover bits. So this one had a little bit of the pink paint left on it. It also had some gilding flakes, so I just had this piece I added all of that to, just to add a little bit more texture and stuff to that one. So keep using up those little bits until you are completely satisfied with your print and you've got a nice clean jelly plate. So then you can cover it up and start all over again on the next day. Here are a few pieces that I finished off camera. This is one using those evergreen pieces. I did some book image transfer onto a green background, added some other layers to it. Here's another print that I did on top of some stenciling that I did with my jelly plate, also onto a book page. This one turned out beautiful. It kind of covered up those edges and really highlighted that stenciling in the middle of this book page. This is another piece, again, tons of different layers. It's kind of a scrap piece of paper that I've been working on, and I just added this leaf print onto it. One of my favorites that I've done so far. Again, just all those different layers and textures you can see. Again, another book page. This was a scrap piece that I just kept kind of printing extras off onto. I did a little bit of navy printing, and I did the ghost print and I did the full print. So I put it down, grabbed the image, lifted up the leaf, and then put it right back down on top to pull up both prints. This is one where I just did the top print, again on a book page with lots of different layers, lots of different paints going on in this one. This was a card base that I did. Again, did the double printing. So first print with the leaf down, lifted it up, pulled the leaf out, put it back down, and printed the leaf image as well for a really neat look. And finally, I have this last one. This is again one of my favorites. This was a full kind of branch that I put down. Again, leftover pieces on this background, and I just kept printing and printing and printing until I ended up with this beautiful paper. Now, one thing I do want to mention about this technique, it looks beautiful in metallics. So here I did it in some gold onto a scrap piece of paper. This I used one of those large hosta leaves, and it didn't even fit on the page, but it looked beautiful. I also used a little bit of grasses from outside, those weed grasses that you can find growing along the ditches, and then also another hosta leaf on a book page. These are both done in metallics, and they are just stunning. Another one done in bronze. Very, very faint on this one, but it did turn out beautiful on this book page. And here are just a final few looks at a few more different images that I've done and that I already showed in this video. And I will have some shorts coming up on this technique as well. And you'll see those images that I'm showing now in those shorts. So stay tuned if you want to see more of this technique. That does it for me today. Thanks so much for watching, and happy crafting, everyone.